Today I will share with you the story of how my own son looked me in the eye and stripped me of every ounce of dignity I thought I still had left. After my husband's death, when my heart was already fragile and torn apart, he sneered at me as if I were nothing. His wife stood by his side, smirking, as though they had already claimed everything Matthew and I had built in a lifetime. At that moment, I realized grief was not the only storm I would have to face. But none of them knew what awaited when the lawyer finally began to read the will. Their arrogance would soon turn into dread. If you find these kinds of true, raw family stories meaningful, please like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Welcome to Grandma Life Stories, where we uncover the hidden battles behind closed doors and the lessons they leave behind. The day of Matthew's funeral was suffocating, not because of the heavy Texas sun pressing down on the black suits and dark dresses, but because of the weight in my chest, the ache that no words could describe. For nearly 40 years, Matthew and I had built our lives brick by brick, deal by deal, until we became one of the most respected real estate families in Dallas. $42 million in assets, properties, and legacies that were supposed to symbolize not just wealth, but the sweat, tears, and sacrifices we made together. And yet, standing there in the grand Dawson estate, with the oak coffins polished and rows of white lilies lined neatly across the marble hall, I felt emptier than I ever had in my life. Guests filled every corner of our mansion. Business partners, neighbors, distant relatives, all speaking in hushed tones, sipping glasses of wine, and sharing condolences that felt rehearsed. To them, Matthew was a titan, a man whose empire defined Dallas real estate. To me, he was my husband, my compass, my steady hand when the world threatened to shake. My son Noah, however, did not grieve the same way. At 38, Noah had always been admired in public. He was charming, tall, with a voice that commanded attention. In the business community, people respected his confidence, though I often saw it for what it was, recklessness dressed as charisma. He had my husband's eyes, but none of his patience. Standing beside him was Amy, his wife of 10 years, 35, elegant, sharp-witted, but with an ambition that glinted like a knife whenever she smiled. During the service, she clung to Noah's arm, not in grief, but in quiet triumph, as if her position at his side had finally elevated her into the role of queen of this empire. While I accepted condolences in silence, they greeted guests as though they were already the hosts, shaking hands, offering smiles, whispering promises of what was to come. It was subtle, but I saw it, and others did too. A few raised their brows as if to say, "Shouldn't this be Charlotte's moment?" But no one spoke aloud. Later, when the sun dipped behind the estate, gates and the last cars drove away, I lingered in the dining hall, surrounded by the scent of flowers that had already begun to wilt. Matthew's photograph rested on the mantel, his familiar eyes watching me. My heart whispered a vow. "Matthew," I said quietly, my voice trembling but resolute, "I promise I will protect what we built. I will guard it with every breath left in me." I turned then, only to catch sight of Noah across the room. He leaned close to Amy, his lips barely moving, but I heard it clearly. "It's all ours now." Amy's painted smile curved wider, her eyes sliding toward me like a predator assessing its prey. The words cut sharper than any blade. In the days following the funeral, silence filled the Dawson mansion. Where once Matthew's laughter had echoed through the halls, there was only the sound of my own footsteps. At 59, I had thought my later years would be steady, secure, filled with moments of peace. Instead, I found myself adrift in an ocean of grief and uncertainty. Noah visited often, but not with warmth. He spoke with rehearsed tenderness, offering to handle matters so I wouldn't stress myself. Amy hovered nearby, her hands brushing across documents, her tone dripping with concern but her eyes scanning for weakness. "You should rest, Mom," Noah said one evening, laying a hand on mine. "Dad left everything to me anyway. You know he built all this for me. I'll take care of things. You don't have to worry." Amy nodded, her voice soft but chilling. "Charlotte, you should focus on prayer and peace. Let Noah handle the empire. He was made for this. You weren't." Their words were meant to soothe, but all I felt was the sting of dismissal. In their eyes, I was already a relic, too fragile, too irrelevant to matter. But they underestimated me, because while grief had hollowed me out, it had not erased who I was. I had built this life with Matthew. I had stood beside him in every boardroom, negotiated contracts when his health wavered, sacrificed friendships, dreams, and years of my youth to build what now stood in my son's hands. And as I watched Noah puff his chest with pride and Amy smirk like a woman who had finally won, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was far from over. That was the first time I realized the story of Matthew's will would not be about what he left behind. It would be about what was revealed when greed was given the chance to bare its teeth. And though I did not yet know every step of the road ahead, I felt the storm rising. Because no matter how much my son insisted otherwise, no matter how Amy whispered in his ear, I would never let Matthew's empire crumble under arrogance and entitlement. That night, the mansion felt colder than usual. The halls of Dawson Estate were never silent before Matthew passed, but now even the ticking of the grandfather clock carried an eerie weight. I walked slowly down the corridor, searching for something. Maybe a trace of comfort, maybe just the strength to face another day without him. As I passed by the study, a sliver of light bled through the crack in the heavy oak door. I paused, thinking Noah might be working late. But then I heard voices. Not just voices. His voice, low and mocking, and Amy's sharp as glass. I should have kept walking. I should have respected the boundary of that door. But something in the tone, the cruel edge in their laughter, froze me to the floor. "Noah." Amy's whisper was sly, curling like smoke. "She's fragile now. You've seen her. One gentle push and she'll lean exactly where you want. Smile, hold her hand, look like the dutiful son. She'll sign whatever paper you place in front of her." A pause. Then Noah chuckled. Not the laugh of my little boy who once begged me to read him bedtime stories. This laugh was hard, arrogant. "You're right," he muttered. "She's easy prey. All her life, she's hidden behind Dad's shadow. She knows nothing about running this empire. The moment I tell her it's complicated, she'll nod and hand me the pen." I felt my chest tighten, as though the air had turned to iron. Amy's voice came again, steady, confident. "We'll draft something clean, something that shifts control quietly. She'll believe it's just another routine document, and when the lawyer confirms her signature, it's ours. Every property, every cent. She can have her charity luncheons and her pearls, but the estate belongs to us." Noah gave a short laugh. "She'll thank me for saving her the trouble, and the city will still respect me. Matthew Dawson's only son, no one will question it. Who listens to a grieving widow anyway?" My knees trembled, but I refused to let the sound escape my throat. I leaned closer to the door, my heart pounding in my ears. Amy pressed further. "She's still clinging to her dignity. Break that. Remind her she's old. Remind her that Matthew is gone. Without you, she has nothing. Once she feels powerless, she'll surrender everything with a smile." I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood. My son. My only son. Plotting to strip me of everything Matthew and I had built. "Noah," Amy teased, her tone dripping with cruelty, "you always said she was too soft. This is your chance to prove you're stronger than your father ever was. Don't hesitate." Noah sighed, but not with doubt, with pride. "She thinks I care. She doesn't know that I stopped respecting her years ago. To me, she's just a figurehead. She was never cut out for this world. Dad tolerated her opinions, but I won't. I'll run things the way they should have been run all along." The words stabbed deeper than any blade could. I pressed my hand against the wall, steadying myself. 1,000 memories came rushing back. Noah's first steps, his first broken arm, his laughter in the backyard while Matthew grilled burgers. I had raised him with love. I had stood beside him when he faltered, and now he stood on the other side of that door, tearing apart the last threads of trust that bound us together. I swallowed hard, forcing back tears. I wanted to burst through the door, confront them, scream his name until the echo rattled the chandeliers. But something inside me whispered to wait. If they thought I was fragile, I would let them believe it. If they thought I was blind, I would keep my eyes sharper than ever. Still, their words cut again before I could step away. "She'll never see it coming," Noah said flatly. "Mom's weak. She'll fold like paper. And when she does, everything Matthew left will finally be mine." Amy's laugh lingered like poison in the air. At that, my hand slipped from the wall, my breath sharp and uneven. I stumbled back, the wood floor creaking beneath me. For a moment, I feared they'd heard, but their voices carried on, absorbed in their scheming. I walked away as quickly and quietly as I could, my slippers brushing against the Persian rugs, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it might give me away. By the time I reached my room, my eyes were burning. I closed the door, collapsed against it, and let the weight of their betrayal crush me. For a brief second, I prayed it was grief talking, that Noah's words were born of desperation, not malice. But I knew better. The tone in his voice was not of a son mourning his father. It was the voice of a man who had already crowned himself king. I stood in the darkness of my bedroom, fists clenched. My body trembled, not just from sorrow, but from the slow, steady birth of something else. Resolve. Matthew had trusted me to guard what we built, and I realized in that moment I could not crumble. I could not surrender. If Noah thought I would fold quietly into the shadows, he was mistaken. Yes, my son had betrayed me. Yes, his wife had sharpened his arrogance into a weapon, but they underestimated me, and I would make certain they lived to regret it. The morning after overhearing Noah and Amy's scheme, I felt as though the mansion itself had turned against me. Every portrait on the wall stared back in silence, as if asking why I was still standing there, letting betrayal breathe inside my home. I could not sleep, could not eat. My hands shook when I tried to pour coffee, so I left. The drive to downtown Dallas was quiet, the sky cloudless and sharp. The city moved at its usual relentless pace, but I felt like an intruder in it, a ghost among people who still had lives untouched by treachery. My heart guided me to one place only, the office of John Hale. John had been Matthew's friend for over 30 years. They had built trust in business and in brotherhood. He had served as the family's attorney since Noah was a child. If there was anyone who could steady me, who could help me see past the fog, it was John. His office was tucked inside a tall stone building with brass handles that gleamed in the morning sun. I pushed open the door, the scent of leather and polished wood greeting me like an anchor. His secretary, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, recognized me instantly and ushered me in without question. John stood from behind his desk when he saw me. His hair had turned more silver than brown, but his frame was still solid, his presence steady. He stepped forward, clasping my hands firmly. "Charlotte," he said, his voice heavy with both grief and affection. "I was going to call you today. I didn't want to disturb you too soon after Matthew's passing." My throat tightened, but I managed a nod. "John, I need to know, did Matthew leave something behind? Something that explains what I should do now?" For a moment, John studied me with eyes that saw too much. Then he motioned for me to sit. His office was lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, law journals stacked neatly, photographs of his family scattered among them. He lowered his voice. "Yes, Charlotte," he said slowly. Matthew left a sealed will. He instructed me not to open it until a formal reading with the family present, but he also wrote me a letter, a private note, anticipating this very moment. The words hit me like thunder. I leaned forward, gripping the armrests. He knew? John nodded. Matthew suspected Noah might allow greed to cloud his judgment. He trusted you would need guidance. He wanted to ensure you weren't blindsided. I felt my stomach twist. A mix of sorrow and pride surged through me. Sorrow that Matthew had doubted his own son. Pride that he had trusted me with the strength to carry on. What did he say in the letter? I whispered. John opened a locked drawer and retrieved an envelope. Its edges yellowed slightly from time. He handed it to me with careful hands. This is yours to keep, but I can tell you the essence of it. Matthew wanted Noah to learn responsibility the hard way. He didn't want to reward arrogance or entitlement. He wanted his legacy protected, not consumed. I pressed the envelope to my chest, as though it were Matthew's hand resting there again. John continued, his voice steady. The will itself will speak clearly, but Charlotte, you must prepare yourself. Noah may fight it. Amy will certainly push him to challenge every word. This could get ugly. I drew a long breath, feeling the shift inside me. Last night I had been a woman crushed under the weight of betrayal. But now, hearing Matthew's foresight, holding his words in my hand, I felt a current of strength rising. I won't let them destroy what Matthew built, I said firmly. If this is his will, his last wish, then I'll protect it with everything I have. John leaned back, studying me. There was something like relief in his expression, as if he had feared I would crumble. That is exactly what he hoped you would say. You're stronger than they realize, Charlotte. That's your advantage. I shook, my head slowly. They think I am fragile. They think grief makes me blind. But they don't know me, John. Not really. I may have been quiet all these years, letting Matthew take the lead, but I listened. I learned. And I will not be played for a fool by my own child. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Only the ticking of a small desk clock filled the space. Then John spoke again. There's another thing, he said carefully. Matthew left something symbolic in the will. I cannot reveal the details before the formal reading, but it is designed to test Noah's character. It will not be what he expects. You need to be ready for his reaction. My grip on the envelope tightened. Then let him react. But I will not yield. If Matthew trusted me to carry this burden, I'll see it through. John's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good. Because once that will is opened, there will be no going back. The truth will cut deep, and alliances will shift. But remember, Matthew's intent was not just to punish, but to guide. Even in death, he wanted Noah to learn the value of humility. The words sank into me like fire. For the first time since the funeral, my spine straightened. I felt taller, anchored by purpose rather than drowned by loss. I stood, folding the envelope carefully into my purse. John, thank you. You've given me more than legal advice. You've given me direction. Whatever storm comes next, I'll face it. He rose as well, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You're not alone, Charlotte. Remember that. As I left his office, the roar of Dallas traffic filled the air, but inside me, there was only a sharp, calm determination. Last night I had been broken by Noah's cruelty. Today, Matthew's foresight had stitched me back together. I walked toward my car with one thought burning clear in my mind. If my son wanted a war over this estate, then a war he would have, and I was ready. I knew if I confronted Noah too soon, he would fight back with everything he had. He believed himself clever, and Amy fed that illusion daily. If I wanted to protect Matthew's legacy, I needed to play the part they already assumed I was. Fragile, tired, easy to handle. So I began the performance. The next morning at breakfast, I let my shoulders slump. My hands trembled just slightly as I lifted the teacup. Noah sat across from me, scrolling through his phone. Amy tapped her nails against the table, impatient, as though even family meals were an interruption to her schemes. I cleared my throat. "Noah," I said softly, "perhaps it's time you helped me with some of your father's paperwork. I'm not as strong as I used to be. Just a few things, nothing heavy. Temporary, of course." His head lifted, eyes sharp but quickly masking calculation. "Temporary? What do you mean?" "Just some minor accounts," I replied, sliding a small folder across the table. "A lake cabin maintenance bill. Shareholder note that needs watching. Simple things. I'm so tired lately. It would be a relief." Amy's smirk spread instantly. "That's a wise decision, Charlotte," she purred. "You shouldn't overburden yourself. Noah can handle these. He's good with numbers." I smiled faintly, eyes lowered, letting them see only the outline of weakness. Inside, I measured every flicker on Noah's face. He took the folder like it was the first crack in a locked door. "Of course, Mom," he said, masking his eagerness with forced calm. "I'll take care of it. You should focus on your health." Health. The word hung in the air like a knife. Later that day, when they left for errands, I drove quietly to the office. Not my home office, not the grand desk Matthew once used, but the downtown headquarters of the company that bore his name. The staff there, loyal, seasoned, protective, stood when I walked in. "Mrs. Dawson," the finance director greeted. "I'm so sorry for your loss." I placed a hand over hers. "Thank you. I need a favor. For the next few months, whenever Noah asks for files or financial records, I want a duplicate copy sent directly to me. Quietly. No delays, no questions." Her brows knit for a moment, then she nodded firmly. "Understood." One by one, I spoke to department heads, accounts, real estate, operations. I kept my tone calm, my instructions clear. Noah would think he was in control, but every decision, every movement would echo back to me. I would have eyes where he least expected them. By evening, I was back at the mansion, sitting in the garden as if I had never left. Noah and Amy returned, laughter ringing in the driveway. He looked relaxed, more confident, like a man who believed the keys were slowly sliding into his palm. He joined me at the table. "Mom, I went over those papers. Easy stuff. You don't need to worry anymore." "Thank you, son," I whispered, eyes heavy, like a woman surrendering. Amy stood behind him, arms folded, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "You see? Things are smoother already. You just needed to let go a little." I didn't answer. Silence often says more than words. The next week passed in the rhythm of my deception. I let Noah sit at my desk occasionally, let him sign off on small maintenance checks, let Amy watch as if she were queen over some conquered land. But every evening after they left, I cross-checked the figures on my own. I made notes, compiled files, and built my case brick by brick. And then came the first real test. One afternoon, I overheard Amy on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was low but sharp, like a blade cutting through fabric. "Yes, the Austin Villa," she said. "Prime spot. I can get a buyer lined up before summer. Don't worry, Charlotte won't resist. She barely knows what she signs these days." My chest burned, but I kept walking, making sure she never knew I had heard. That villa had been Matthew's favorite retreat. The place where he taught our granddaughter how to fish, where he sat by the water at dusk with a glass of bourbon in silence. To sell it would be to erase him. That evening at dinner, Noah cleared his throat. "Mom, Amy and I think we should consider selling the Austin property. It's too much for you to handle." Amy leaned in, eyes gleaming. "It's really for the best. That place just sits empty. We could reinvest the money somewhere more useful." I let my fork rest on the plate. My pulse thudded, but I forced my face calm, lips faintly trembling like a woman too tired to argue. "If you think it's wise, then perhaps draw up the details. I trust you." Noah's grin flashed for a second before he smothered it. I'll look into it, don't you worry. But inside, I promised Matthew, they will not touch it. Later that night, alone in my room, I wrote in my private ledger, Austin Villa, watch closely. Block sale at all costs. The performance was working. Noah believed more each day that I was fading, leaning on him. Amy grew bolder, already speaking of assets as if they were hers. They underestimated me with every breath, every smirk, every whispered plan. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because while they schemed in plain sight, I was documenting, preparing, waiting for the moment to strike. I closed the ledger, slid it into the drawer, and locked it. Then I looked at Matthew's photograph on the nightstand. They think I'm weak, I whispered to him. But I am not the one in danger here. They are. The Dawson estate was more than walls and land. It was Matthew's blood, his sweat poured into timber and stone, a symbol of how a man with nothing had built something lasting. And yet, on a sharp afternoon, Noah stormed into the study waving a draft contract like it was his birthright. Mom, he said flatly, we need to talk about Dawson. I looked up from the ledger in my hands. The estate? Yes, he snapped. It's time to sell. We're sitting on untapped equity. Austin Villa, fine, but Dawson is the crown jewel. Developers would line up for it. Dad built it for me. He would want me to use it to expand. The way he said for me stung like acid. My voice cut steady. Your father built it for this family, for us all. It's not just property, Noah. It's history. He planted every oak in that garden himself. Do you really think he meant for you to pawn it off like a poker chip? Noah's face reddened. His tone climbed. Mom, you don't understand business. Nostalgia doesn't generate returns. I'm not a child anymore, waiting for your approval. Dawson belongs to me. Dad built it for me. Amy leaned casually against the doorway, arms folded. Her smile was sharp, deliberate, like a blade slipped between ribs. You're holding him back, she said coolly. Every empire needs to grow or it dies. You clinging to the past won't change the future. You're afraid. Charlotte, admit it. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than Noah's shouting. I steadied my breathing. My instinct was to lash back, to remind her she was nothing but a guest in a house she never helped raise. But I bit it down. Rage would expose me. Instead, I set the ledger down and stared Noah in the eye. You think selling Dawson is growth? I asked. It's destruction. And if you do this, you'll lose more than money. You'll lose the one thing your father wanted most, his legacy intact. Noah slammed the contract on the desk. Legacy doesn't pay dividends. I'm moving forward with this, with or without you. My hand clenched around Matthew's old fountain pen, but I forced myself calm. I knew then Noah wasn't just reckless. He was blind with entitlement. And blind men, guided by greed, walk straight into cliffs. It didn't take long for Noah to find a partner willing to feed that hunger. A week later, word reached me. Noah had been seen at the Sterling Club in Dallas, the kind of place where fortunes changed hands over glasses of bourbon. I didn't need to guess twice why he was there, so I followed. Not inside the room, he would smell suspicion, but close enough to know. Through the tall glass doors, I saw him seated across from Leo Carmichael. Even from a distance, Leo carried the air of a man who thrived on other people's risks. Mid-40s, slick hair, a suit cut too sharp, eyes always calculating. A broker, a deal maker, the kind of man who smiled while stealing your shoes. I moved discreetly through the lobby, close enough to hear fragments. Noah leaned forward, voice confident, loud enough to carry. 25 million, a flagship restaurant in Uptown, Dawson branded, exclusive dining, corporate events, private suites. It'll be the talk of Dallas. Leo swirled his drink, amused. And the capital? I can liquidate assets, Noah said. Dawson Estate, maybe part of the company portfolio. And with your backing, doors open fast. We're talking double returns in under 2 years. Leo's grin spread slowly. Double? That's ambitious. Risky, but the Dawson name, it still carries weight. He tapped a finger against the table, savoring the calculation. All right, I'll vouch. I'll bring in investors, smooth the banks, guarantee credibility. You deliver me a cut, 10% off the top. Done, Noah said instantly, almost too eagerly. I clenched the railing where I stood hidden. Matthew's name, his reputation, being traded like cheap currency. Leo leaned closer, his tone dropping, but I caught the edges. But listen, kid, this only works if you're bold. No hesitation. You want to play in the big leagues, you burn the past. No more mother, no more sentimental anchors. Clear? Noah straightened his shoulders, chest puffed like he'd been knighted. Clear. Amy appeared beside him moments later, draping her hand over his arm, flashing that same victorious smirk. She whispered something that made Leo laugh. The three of them toasted as though a kingdom had been secured. I stepped back into the shadow of a column, my pulse hammering. In that moment, it was no longer about Noah stumbling. He was sprinting, headlong into a pit. Selling Dawson, gutting the company, handing Matthew's honor to men like Leo who saw legacy only as leverage. Driving home, I replayed their words, their gestures, every smug smile. By the time I reached the estate gates, I knew this was no longer a family dispute. It was war. Noah wasn't just risking money. He was risking our name, our foundation, everything Matthew had sworn to protect. Inside the house, he passed me in the hall, his face lit with reckless energy. "Big things are coming, Mom," he said. "Bigger than you ever imagined. You'll thank me one day." I stopped him with a look. "Noah, remember this. Every empire built too fast collapses twice as hard." He laughed, shaking his head. "That's your problem. You don't think big enough. Leo gets it. Amy gets it. You don't." And then he walked away. Alone in the silence, I pressed my hand against Matthew's portrait on the wall. "They think I'm powerless," I whispered, "but they have no idea who they're playing with." I thought Noah's arrogance had already reached its peak. I was wrong. The following week, he started carrying a folder into every meeting, a thick binder with Dawson embossed on the cover. At first, I assumed it was nothing more than his notes, but then whispers reached me. He wasn't just saying heir apparent. He was showing people something, a document. At a dinner with two board advisors, I saw it myself. He spread out a clean, cream-colored sheet, the kind of paper our lawyers used for drafts. Across the top, in bold, it read, "Last Will and Testament of Matthew Dawson." My stomach clenched. He spoke with a steady, rehearsed confidence. Of course, nothing is official until the reading next week, but this was my father's intent. His signature is right there. He wanted me to carry Dawson Enterprises into its next phase. I owe it to him to act swiftly, to capture opportunities before they pass. The advisors nodded as if reassured. None of them noticed or cared that the page lacked a seal, a notary stamp, any sign of legal completion. To their eyes, it looked legitimate. To them, it was enough. Later that night, I confronted him in the hallway. "Noah, what did I just see?" I demanded. He didn't flinch. "A draft, Mom. A draft that reflects Dad's wishes. You can fight me all you want, but this company needs a leader willing to act. Investors don't wait for ceremonies. They want proof of continuity." "It's not proof," I shot back. "It's a forgery." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It's persuasion. Don't confuse the two." The more dangerous part wasn't the paper itself. It was how he wielded it. At one meeting with bankers, I overheard him presenting his pitch. He no longer spoke like a desperate heir. He spoke like a CEO mid-transition, with jargon that sounded both professional and inevitable. "We're restructuring and diversifying the Dawson portfolio post-transition," he said, calm as ice. "Our family enterprise is entering a new generational phase. That means capital reallocation, fresh partnerships, and strategic investments. We're not just inheriting, we're innovating." I watched the bankers lean in. When Noah framed it as Dawson Enterprises, it sounded invincible. Not Noah Dawson begging for cash, but a dynasty securing its future. Amy chimed in smoothly, her tone dripping with confidence. What you're seeing here is generational succession at its finest. The market trusts stability, and Dawson Enterprises represents exactly that. They had built a performance, one that made Noah appear unstoppable. The deals themselves were cunningly shaped, not outright commitments, but instruments designed to trap. I managed to glance over one of the agreements Noah brought home. It wasn't a finalized contract. It was a letter of intent, an LOI. At first glance, it seemed harmless, just an expression of interest, but buried in the clauses was the poison. The text read, Party B agrees to reserve exclusive rights to participate in the Dawson investment project for 30 days. In exchange, Party A will deposit an earnest sum of X dollars within 10 business days, following the probate hearing. Should Party A fail to deliver, a breakup fee equal to 15% of the project value shall be due immediately. 15% of $25 million, nearly $4 million, money that would never come back. He was gambling with liabilities he didn't even own yet. Worse, every document bore his father's name as a shield, turning Matthew's reputation into collateral. One evening, I entered the study to find Noah at the desk, drafting emails. Amy was at his shoulder, scrolling through numbers on a tablet. Noah needs reassurance, she said. He wants to know the money will clear after probate. Noah replied without hesitation. Tell him the funds are as good as delivered. This is Dawson Enterprises. We don't default. I cut in from the doorway. You mean you don't default yet? They both looked up. You're walking a thin line, I said, making promises with assets you don't control, waving a draft will in people's faces like it's gospel. Do you know what happens if one of them sues? Noah's jaw tightened. Mom, don't undermine me in front of Amy. You keep living in fear, but I'm building. Dad wouldn't want hesitation. He'd want boldness. Amy added, almost sweetly, He's right, Charlotte. The world rewards decisiveness. You clinging to procedure only makes him look stronger by comparison. I stared at both of them, their arrogance feeding each other, and felt the weight of Matthew's portrait looming over the room. Within days, rumors began spreading in the market. Dawson was restructuring, shifting into hospitality, leveraging assets for growth. Some believed it, others doubted, but all were talking. And behind those rumors, I knew, were Noah's staged documents and empty assurances. At a luncheon in Fort Worth, he stood at the head of a long oak table, investors lining both sides. He held up the same draft will like it was a banner. My father's final wish was continuity, he declared. He built this empire for me to take forward. We're not waiting for bureaucracy. We're moving now. You want in? You have 30 days of exclusivity to secure your place. After that, the door closes. The room murmured with excitement. One man asked, "And what if the funds delay?" Noah smiled, rehearsed, flawless. Dawson doesn't delay. We honor commitments. That was the moment I realized he wasn't bluffing anymore. He believed his own lies. That night, I shut the door to Matthew's study and sat in the silence. The scent of his old cologne still lingered faintly on the shelves. His books, his papers, the weight of his presence, everything pressed against me. I reached for the box of letters he left behind. My hands shook as I untied the string. Inside were envelopes, his handwriting firm and unyielding. I pulled one free and unfolded it under the dim lamp. His words cut through me like steel. If Noah falls into greed, let him taste the consequences. Only then will he learn. I whispered to the empty room, "Matthew, I'll see this through." My voice cracked, but my resolve tightened. I read the letter twice, then 3 times. Each line was Matthew's foresight, his understanding of our son's weakness. He had known. He had predicted this very spiral. He hadn't left me unprepared. He had armed me. I laid the letter aside and opened another folder stacked nearby. These weren't personal. They were company documents, financial records, contracts with signatures that weren't quite right, numbers that didn't align, expenses disguised as consulting fees. My chest tightened as I turned page after page. It was all there. Decisions Noah had made before Matthew's death, deals already bleeding the company, vendors paid twice, shell companies receiving transfers, and in the margins, Noah's initials, bold, like a child proud of his mischief. I slammed the file shut, anger rising in my throat. He wasn't just reckless now, he had been reckless all along. The clock struck midnight, and I sat back, exhausted but unable to rest. The next morning, I called John. When he arrived, he looked at the stack of documents spread across Matthew's desk. His eyes narrowed. "Where did you find these?" "They were buried under Matthew's old files," I said, "hidden but not gone. Look here." I pointed to a series of payments. Same vendor, 3 invoices, same amount, same date. That's not a mistake. John leaned closer, scanning. "And here, see this? That signature isn't the CFO's. It's traced. Sloppy." My heart pounded. So he was draining us even before Matthew passed. John let out a low whistle. "Charlotte, this isn't just incompetence. This is deliberate." I pressed my palms to the desk, steadying myself. We need proof that holds in a boardroom, not just whispers. If Noah waves that fake will, we need something heavier. John nodded. "We'll track every irregular payment. Build a timeline. Once it's all mapped, nobody can deny it." That afternoon, we drove to the downtown office quietly. John had pulled access logs, emails, and transaction records. We sat together in the conference room, piecing things together like detectives. I scrolled through Noah's correspondence. His tone was cocky, casual. "Push this through. Don't bother Mom with details. Dad always said speed matters." I clenched my fists. He was using Matthew's words as cover, twisting them into excuses for theft. John dropped another folder in front of me. "Look, he signed an LOI with Brahman weeks before Matthew's death. That means he was already positioning himself. He didn't wait for probate. He didn't even wait for his father's body to be cold." The reality cut deep. My son had been planning this long before grief could even set in. As the sun set, John leaned back. "Charlotte, you have enough to corner him, but the question is, when?" I looked at the pile of letters beside me, Matthew's voice echoing in my mind. "Let him taste the consequences." "Not yet," I said. "If I strike now, he'll spin it as me resisting change. No, we wait until he hangs himself with his own rope. Then we tighten the knot." John's eyes met mine. "That takes patience." "Patience," I said coldly, "is all I have left." That night, back in Matthew's study, I sat again with the letters. My hands no longer trembled. My fear had hardened into something else. Clarity. I whispered into the silence. "Matthew, I'll carry this to the end. Not because I want revenge, but because he must learn. He must build again, not on stolen ground, but on his own." I closed the box, locked it, and turned off the lamp. The silence was heavy, but this time it was no longer suffocating. It was the silence before a storm, and I was ready to bring it. The day of the will reading arrived, and the Dawson estate felt colder than I had ever known. The long library, with its towering shelves and heavy curtains drawn against the sun, was transformed into a courtroom of sorts. The air was thick with unease. I sat at the center of the long mahogany table, posture straight, face calm. Inside, my heart was steady but guarded. To my right was John Hale, our family lawyer, his expression unreadable, papers neatly stacked before him. Across from me sat Noah and Amy, side by side, Noah's shoulders squared with false confidence, his chin raised. Amy leaned close, whispering to him with a smile that barely hid her smugness. To them, this was a formality, a ceremonial rubber stamp before the floodgates opened in their favor. I watched their arrogance like one watches a storm gather over calm water. John cleared his throat. The room hushed instantly. His deep voice carried authority, every syllable deliberate. By order of the late Matthew Dawson, I am tasked with reading his final will and testament. This document has been verified, sealed, and will be entered into probate effective today. Noah rolled his eyes. Yes, let's move it along, he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Amy smirked at his impatience. John did not flinch. He continued with the standard provisions: donations to long-serving employees, bequests to charity, instructions for the upkeep of certain properties. Noah tapped his fingers against the table. Amy sighed dramatically. Finally, John adjusted his glasses and turned to the final section. The atmosphere shifted. Even Noah sat up straighter, waiting for the words he thought would crown him. John's tone sharpened. Now, regarding Dawson Enterprises and the totality of the Dawson estate, including liquid and non-liquid assets, properties, and holdings, Noah leaned back with a satisfied smirk. Amy clasped his arm. John continued. Matthew Dawson hereby appoints his wife, Charlotte Dawson, as the sole heir and primary executor of his estate. She shall assume the role of chairwoman of the Dawson Enterprises Board, with full authority to act in his stead. The silence was deafening. I watched Noah's face shift from smug to stunned in a blink. His jaw clenched, his smirk evaporating. Amy's mouth dropped open, her hand falling away from his arm. John's voice was steady, unrelenting. Furthermore, it is Matthew Dawson's express wish that his son, Noah Dawson, inherit a trust fund in the amount of $100,000. This fund is subject to conditions, including demonstrable employment, personal financial responsibility, and abstention from misusing Dawson Enterprises' name for personal gain. The fund will be administered by Charlotte Dawson at her discretion. The air froze. My hands remained still on the table. But inside, I felt the weight of Matthew's foresight. Noah shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor, his face flushed crimson. "This is a fraud!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "I built this, too. I kept this family name alive when Dad was gone, when Mom was—" He stopped himself, glaring at me. "You can't expect me to believe he'd cut me off for a measly $100,000. This is my company, my inheritance." Amy's eyes welled with tears, but they weren't of grief. They were rage. "This is absurd. Matthew loved Noah. He would never do this. He trusted him more than anyone." John's reply was calm, surgical. Matthew knew exactly what he was doing. He made these arrangements long before his illness worsened. This was his final test. He wanted to see if Noah would act responsibly and wait, or let greed consume him. Sadly, Noah, you answered that for him. Noah's fists clenched. "This is your doing, Mother. You poisoned him against me. You filled his head with lies." I met his fury with silence at first, letting the weight of his own words hang in the air. Then I spoke, my voice sharp, steady. "I didn't need to poison anything. Your actions spoke louder than I ever could. The fake documents, the reckless deals, the arrogance. Your father saw through it all." Amy slammed her hand on the table. "You think you've won? This isn't over. Noah will contest this. He'll drag you through court until every penny is gone," John interjected, his voice cutting her off like a gavel. "He can try, but this will is airtight. It was notarized, witnessed, and stored under court seal. Contesting it will expose every questionable decision Noah has made. Are you prepared for that scrutiny?" Amy's face went pale. Noah looked away, his breath shallow, his chest heaving. For the first time, his bravado cracked into something raw. Fear. I let the silence stretch. My gaze locked on him. When I finally spoke, it was not with anger, but with the steel Matthew had left me. "Your father wanted you to stand on your own feet, Noah. not to live off his shadow, not to twist his legacy into your playground. He left you something, but he left you a lesson first. If you can't learn it, then the money will mean nothing, and neither will the Dawson name. Noah dropped back into his chair, his head in his hands. Amy whispered frantically to him, but he didn't respond. His shoulders shook, not with sorrow, but with rage he couldn't unleash. John closed the will, sliding the documents back into their envelope. The reading is concluded. Charlotte, as executor, all further proceedings are under your authority. I nodded once. Thank you, John. I rose slowly, steady, while Noah and Amy remained frozen in disbelief. As I walked toward the door, I felt Matthew's presence stronger than ever. This was not just victory, it was justice. I had carried his foresight through, and though the wound of betrayal still burned, I knew I had fulfilled his wish. Behind me, the silence lingered. The sound of Noah's world collapsing was not loud. It was quiet, suffocating, undeniable. The room had not yet recovered from the shock of the will when Noah's fury erupted. His voice cut through the air like shattered glass. "This is fake!" he shouted, slamming his hand on the table so hard the papers trembled. "You manipulated him, Mother, you and Hale. You twisted everything. You think you can steal what belongs to me?" I stayed silent. His rage was loud, but his desperation was louder. Amy clutched his arm, whispering, "Calm down, Noah, please." But he shook her off, violently. "You wanted this, didn't you?" he hissed, pointing at me. "All those nights you sat by his side, feeding him poison against me. You turned him into your puppet." John Hale leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. His calm presence made Noah's tantrum look even more pitiful. I kept my voice even. "Are you finished?" Noah sneered, his chest heaving. "Not even close." He reached inside his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a red clip. His hand trembled, not from weakness, but from eagerness to strike. "This," he declared, holding the stack high for everyone to see, "is the real will. The draft Father wrote before you got to him. This is what he truly wanted." Amy's eyes lit with hope. "Yes, Noah, show them the truth." I did not move. Instead, I tilted my head, my voice clear and sharp. "Then by all means, Noah, present it." The doors opened. At my signal, several members of the Dawson Enterprises board entered, followed by key investors. Their faces were tight, their eyes scanning the tense scene. Noah stiffened as he realized the audience had just multiplied. I spoke with deliberate calm. "Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for joining us. Noah insists he holds proof of Matthew's true intentions. I thought you might like to hear it directly." Noah's face flickered with confusion, but pride overrode caution. He thrust the stack forward. "This document shows Father never intended to hand everything to her. He meant for me to run the company. He knew I was the only one capable." Gasps rippled through the room. The investors leaned in, whispering to one another. I kept my gaze locked on Noah. "Tell me," I said slowly, my words like blades. "Is this the same document you showed some of these gentlemen to secure their letters of intent?" The investors stiffened. A man in a gray suit nodded grimly. "Yes, that is the one." A woman beside him added, "He claimed it was binding, that he was the next CEO. He pressed us to sign quickly under his assurances." Noah's smile faltered. That's right, because it's true. Father wanted me in charge. This is proof." I turned to John Hale. "John." John rose smoothly, a folder already in hand. "As counsel to the estate, I must clarify for everyone present. The document Noah holds is a draft, discarded and superseded months before Matthew Dawson signed his final will. It has no legal standing whatsoever. However," he paused, letting the silence burn, "Noah used that worthless draft to solicit agreements from investors, binding letters of intent. Each LOI contains a termination penalty, total exposure, nearly $4 million. The room erupted. Investors stood, voices rising. "4 million!" one shouted. "He tricked us into liabilities?" Amy's face drained of color. She looked at Noah as if seeing him for the first time. Noah stumbled, shaking his head. No, that's not right. I was protecting the company, trying to secure capital." John's voice sliced through him. "With forged authority. Worse, we have documentation showing you signed loan applications using your mother's name as guarantor. That is fraud, Noah. Criminal fraud." Gasps again. Eyes turned to me, then back to Noah. Noah's jaw dropped. He looked cornered, like an animal realizing the cage had been locked from the outside. "She's lying, you're lying. This is all a setup." I rose from my chair, slow and deliberate. My voice was low, steady, and final. "Noah, your father's will didn't strip you of power. You did that yourself. You didn't inherit a company. You manufactured a debt. You didn't protect his legacy. You endangered it. And now you stand exposed, not as a leader, but as a liability." Amy whispered, almost in a trance. "You told me. You said everything was guaranteed. You said your father already signed." Noah turned to her, panic in his eyes. "Amy, listen, But she pulled away, shaking her head violently. Her tears now weren't for him. They were for herself, for the ruin he had dragged her into. The board members rose, angry voices flooding the room. "Unacceptable. We trusted you. This is malpractice." John raised his hand, commanding order. "I advise everyone remain calm. Mrs. Dawson will assume the chairmanship as stipulated. We will work through this together, but let there be no doubt. Noah Dawson's actions have placed the company at risk. This will be addressed fully in due course." The anger in the room only intensified, but their focus was no longer on me. It was on Noah. I watched him shrink in his seat, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of humiliation. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man who had gambled everything and lost. Amy's eyes hardened. She no longer looked like a partner, but an accuser. I leaned forward, my final words sharp as steel. "You wanted to prove yourself, Noah, and you did. You proved to everyone here that greed, deception, and recklessness are your true inheritance, not Dawson Enterprises." The silence that followed was absolute. The board's anger, Amy's shock, John's authority, it all pressed down on him until he could no longer lift his head. The trap had closed, and it hadn't been set by me alone. It had been set by Matthew, by every choice Noah made, by every lie he told. When I finally stood to leave, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of chairs scraping, investors demanding answers, Amy's sharp voice cutting at Noah, those noises told the whole story. He had wanted power. Instead, he inherited disgrace. And I, for the first time since Matthew's passing, felt the weight begin to lift. When the heavy oak doors finally closed behind the last guest, silence fell over the grand room. The long mahogany table still bore the scattered documents from the reading, but the air had shifted. No more lawyers, no investors, no audience, just me and my son. Noah stood rigid, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with humiliation that hadn't yet turned into words. I didn't gloat. Victory had no sweetness when it came at the cost of a son's ruin. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Matthew's strong, steady script. My hand trembled as I held it out. "Noah," I said evenly, "this is from your father. He wrote it for you, for this moment." He hesitated, his jaw clenched, suspicion flickering across his face. But his fingers still reached for the letter, as if some part of him needed to hear his father's voice again. I watched him rip the seal. His eyes scanned the lines, and his expression cracked. His lips quivered, his shoulders slumped. For the first time that day, Noah didn't look like a man fighting for power. He looked like a boy who had lost his way. He whispered, barely audible, He knew. Tears gathered in his eyes as he kept reading, his voice breaking on the words Matthew had left behind. My son, power gained without work is a curse. I built not just a company, but a trust, a legacy, brick by brick. You must learn that building is harder, but it is the only path that gives life meaning. I pray you choose creation over destruction. The letter fell from his hands. He covered his face, his sobs raw, unrestrained. I didn't move closer. I didn't comfort him. Instead, I spoke firmly, my voice steady though my heart ached. Your father didn't want you to fail, Noah. He wanted you to learn. He wanted you to understand that respect isn't inherited, it's earned. You thought you could demand it. That's why you lost everything before you even began. He shook his head, choking on his own guilt. I wanted what was mine. It was never yours to take, I replied sharply. It was yours to earn if you had the patience, but you let greed blind you, and greed has a cost. For a long moment there was nothing but his broken breathing and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The next morning came with a knock at the front gates. I was in the sitting room when the sound echoed through the house. My heart sank even before I saw the uniforms. The police. 2 officers entered, their faces grim. Behind them, John Hale stood silent, holding a folder. Noah Dawson, the taller officer announced, you are under investigation for forgery and fraud. Noah stumbled backward, disbelief flooding his face. What? No, this isn't happening. You can't. But then Leo, his so-called ally, was led in handcuffs through the doorway. His head hung low, his voice hoarse. I told them everything, Noah, about the fake documents, about how you used your mother's name to secure the loans. I couldn't take the heat alone. The color drained from Noah's face. You betrayed me? Leo didn't look at him. He just whispered, you betrayed yourself. The officers read Noah his rights. He shouted, cursed, tried to argue, but it was useless. The evidence was there, laid bare in black and white. The law wasn't swayed by anger or denial. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands gripping the fabric so tightly my knuckles whitened. My son, my flesh and blood, being taken away in disgrace. Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them back. This wasn't about pity. This was justice. As they escorted him out, Noah turned once more, desperation flashing across his face. Mother, please, say something. You can stop this. I stood, but my words were cold, unshaken. Noah, I warned you. Your father warned you. We both wanted you to stand on your own, not drag everyone else down with you. I will not shield you from the consequences of your own choices. His eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, he looked like the frightened child who once ran to me for protection. But the moment passed, and the officers pulled him through the doorway. The house fell silent again. I sat back down, my body heavy, my chest tight. My tears finally spilled, quiet and uncontrollable. They weren't tears of triumph. They were tears of a mother who had done everything she could and still had to watch her son fall. I whispered to the empty room, to Matthew's memory, I didn't want this. I wanted him to change, but perhaps this is the only way. The world outside moved on. Investors regrouped, the company stabilized, life continued. But for me, time slowed. I thought of Noah's last look, torn between rage and despair. I thought of Matthew's words in the letter, words meant to guide a son who had chosen the wrong road. Justice had spoken, not through my hands, but through Noah's own mistakes. The punishment wasn't mine to deliver. It was the world's, the law's, and ultimately, his own doing. I sat there silent, my tears blurring the morning light that poured through the tall windows. There was no gloating in me, no sense of victory, only the solemn weight of truth. A family broken by greed, a legacy nearly destroyed, and a mother left to carry both grief and strength. But even in the quiet, I knew this. Matthew's lesson had been delivered. Perhaps not in the way I hoped, but in the way it had to be. The courtroom in Dallas was cold that morning, the kind of sterile cold that stripped people of pretense. The flags hung still, the judge's gavel resting on the bench like a weapon waiting to strike. I sat at the back, quiet, my hands folded in my lap. This wasn't my battle anymore. Justice had its own stage. Noah stood before the judge, no longer wearing the tailored suits that once made him look untouchable. His face was pale, eyes restless. He looked smaller, almost shrunken inside his own skin. The judge's voice was sharp and unyielding. "Mr. Noah Dawson, the court has reviewed the evidence presented. Your actions constitute forgery, misrepresentation, and financial fraud. The damage you caused to investors and to the estate cannot be ignored." Noah's attorney tried to soften the blow, speaking of youth, of poor judgment, of the pressure of expectations. But it didn't matter. The truth was clear. The verdict came like the crack of a whip. Heavy fines running into millions, enough to strip away the illusion of wealth he clung to. Mandatory restitution, forcing him to repay misused funds. Permanent stain on his reputation, blacklisted from holding executive power in any registered corporation. And then the words that silenced even the whispers in the room. "You will no longer be recognized as a lawful trustee of the Dawson estate. The trust shall remain under protection of its rightful guardianship." Noah staggered as though the bench had physically struck him. His lips parted, but no words came. Amy was there, sitting 2 rows in front of me. Throughout the trial, she had worn her usual mask of poise, but I saw the cracks forming. When the sentence was spoken, she didn't reach for Noah's hand. She didn't look at him. She stood, her heels echoing against the tile, and walked out without a word. The sound of the door closing behind her was louder than the gavel. Noah turned, desperation flashing across his face. "Amy, wait!" But she didn't. She never looked back. The courtroom emptied slowly, reporters scribbling, investors muttering, strangers avoiding Noah's eyes as if disgrace might rub off on them. I remained seated until the crowd thinned. When I finally approached him, he was slumped on the bench, his tie loosened, his hands shaking. "Mother," he whispered, his voice raw. "They've ruined me." I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "No, Noah, you ruined yourself. They only held up the mirror." He shook his head, his breath shallow. "Amy's gone. The company's gone. My name. Everything." His voice cracked. "What am I supposed to do now?" I didn't answer. Some questions had no comfort, only truth. The weeks that followed were merciless. The press had a feast. Headlines painted him as the prodigal son turned criminal. Photographs showed him leaving court, shoulders bent, surrounded by flashing cameras. Business journals stripped away his former title of heir apparent, replacing it with fraudster, disgraced, fallen. Investors he once charmed now spoke his name with contempt. Invitations dried up. Friends vanished. Even old acquaintances avoided him in public, fearful of association. I heard whispers from mutual contacts. Amy had filed for separation. She had left for New York, reclaiming her maiden name. She sold the jewelry he had given her, moved into a high-rise downtown, and never mentioned him again. For Noah, the punishment was not just financial. It was social exile. One afternoon, months later, I saw him again. Not in a courtroom, not surrounded by lawyers or officers, but at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. I had gone there to meet a friend. Through the window, I spotted him, alone at a corner table, hunched over a laptop, his clothes simple, his face gaunt. He looked nothing like the man who once strutted into boardrooms. He was just another customer, lost in the crowd. I stepped inside. He saw me and froze. His eyes widened, shame flooding his face. I walked to his table, my footsteps measured. "Noah." He lowered his gaze. "Mother, I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." "I didn't come here for you," I said truthfully. Then, after a pause, I sat across from him. "But now that I'm here, I will say this. You're still breathing. That means you still have choices." He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've lost everything. I'm nothing now." I leaned in, my words sharp but not cruel. "You were nothing when you thought everything belonged to you. Now, stripped of it all, maybe you have the chance to become something real." He blinked rapidly, struggling to hold back tears. "I don't even know where to start." "Start where everyone else starts," I told him. "From the bottom. You wanted to be a builder? Building not with stolen trust or borrowed names, with your own hands, one day brick by brick, if you have the strength." For a long time, he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his shoulders straightened slightly. There was no sudden redemption, no grand promise. Just a faint nod, as if some corner of him finally heard what had always been spoken. In the months that followed, I heard fragments of his new life. He rented a modest apartment, sold the last of his luxury possessions, and began working with a small logistics firm, not as a director, but as an assistant. He carried boxes, filed papers, drove deliveries, menial tasks for someone who once demanded obedience. But for the first time, the work was honest. Neighbors told me he often kept to himself. No lavish parties, no extravagant gestures. Some evenings he sat outside his building with nothing but a notebook, scribbling furiously, as if trying to map a future no one could hand to him. And though he never came to me for help, I sensed he had begun to taste what Matthew wanted him to understand, the value of building, not taking. As for me, I didn't watch with bitterness or glee. I carried my own burden. A mother's heart never stops aching, even when justice is served. But I also carried the truth. Punishment, though harsh, had carved away the illusions. The judge had spoken. The law had stripped him of power. Amy had walked away, and society had turned its back. Now it was up to Noah to face the hardest sentence of all, life itself, without the safety net he once believed unshakable. I closed my eyes one evening, Matthew's words echoing in my memory. "Power gained without work is a curse." For the first time, I believed Noah might finally be learning that lesson. 3 years had passed. Time didn't heal everything, but it forced change, whether we wanted it or not. I sometimes drove past the edge of Dallas, where the city gave way to quiet neighborhoods. There, tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store, was a modest office with a faded sign that read, "Dawson Logistics Services." The letters weren't polished gold like the old corporate logos Noah once demanded. They were painted by hand, chipped at the edges but still standing. I walked in once, unannounced. The office smelled of coffee, paper, and sweat. Inside, Noah sat at a desk that barely fit the room. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his tie cheap, his hands roughened from long hours. He wasn't barking orders into phones or surrounded by assistants. He was scribbling numbers in a ledger, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he noticed me, he froze. For a moment, I saw the old instinct, that flash of pride that once made him unbearable. But it didn't last. His shoulders dropped. He stood quietly like a man acknowledging reality. "Mother," he said, voice steady but tired. I nodded. "You're working?" "Yes." His answer was short, almost clipped. But then he added, "It's not much. Deliveries, paperwork, invoices, but it's mine, and I'm learning." His tone wasn't defensive. It was different, measured, grounded. He no longer spoke to impress. He spoke because the words were simply true. I didn't praise him. He didn't need my applause. He needed to keep going. Ethan, his son, had grown fast, 14 now, taller, his voice deepening but his eyes still bright. He visited me almost every weekend, filling the house with energy I thought I'd lost forever. One Saturday afternoon, he burst through my garden gate with a grin stretched ear to ear. He carried a notebook, its pages filled with sketches and ideas. "Grandma," he said breathlessly, dropping beside me on the bench, "one day I'll build a company, a real one, bigger than Dad ever dreamed of, but not the wrong way. I'll build something that makes you proud." His words were sharp, ambitious, but his eyes carried sincerity. I placed my hand on his. "Do it with honesty, Ethan. That's the only way it lasts." He nodded fiercely, as if sealing a pact. Sometimes I wondered if Noah had heard his son speak that way. If he did, maybe it hurt. Maybe it healed. Maybe both. Life didn't erase Noah's mistakes. Dallas society remembered. Doors stayed closed, invitations lost in the wind. When his name appeared in news articles, it was still followed by words like disgraced or convicted. But slowly, he carved out a corner of respect. Not fame, not wealth, but the kind that came from showing up every day, doing work no one else wanted, and not running away. I heard whispers from people in town. He's stubborn. He works late. He doesn't cheat anymore. That anymore was a wound, but also a warning. Sometimes Ethan told me about visiting his father's office. "He doesn't talk much, Grandma," he said once, "but he listens now. He asks me questions about school. He even packed me lunch last week." Those words cut me deeper than any verdict. It meant Matthew's letter had not been wasted. Some part of Noah was still alive, still capable of learning, even if it took ruin to reach it. But I didn't fool myself. Forgiveness wasn't simple. A mother's heart bends but doesn't break, yet it remembers every scar. I hadn't forgotten the humiliation, the betrayal, the cruelty he once showed me. I never would. One evening, Noah came to the house. He stood at the doorway like a guest instead of a son. His face was lean, his hair streaked with gray, though he was still young enough to fight it. I wanted to say... He paused, struggling. Words had always come easily to him when he lied, but truth slowed him down. "I can't undo what I did. I know that, but I'm trying not to waste what's left." I held his gaze. "That's between you and your conscience, Noah. Not me." He nodded. "I understand." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't beg. He simply accepted the weight. That, in its own way, was growth. 3 years taught me something Matthew always knew. Punishment doesn't end in a courtroom. It lives in choices made afterward. Every time Noah walked into that small office, he carried his punishment with him. Every time Amy's absence followed him home at night, he felt it. Every headline that still called him a fraud was a reminder. But in the silence between all that noise, he had the chance to become a man, not just an heir. Ethan was the bridge. The boy saw both worlds, the father who fell, the grandmother who stood firm. And from that, he drew his own path. One late afternoon, I sat in my garden. The sun was low, painting the sky with orange and violet. The flowers rustled in the breeze, and the air smelled faintly of earth and roses. Ethan had just left after dinner. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Grandma. You'll see." His footsteps faded down the path, leaving me in the hush of twilight. I closed my eyes and breathed, and in that silence I spoke to Matthew. "Matthew," I whispered, "I did what you asked." I gave him a chance. Not forgiveness, not indulgence, but a chance. He stands now on his own feet. He no longer mocks, no longer takes. He works, Matthew. He bleeds for it. That was your wish, wasn't it? That he learns the worth of sweat over shortcuts. I felt the weight lift, not entirely, but enough. Enough to know I had honored my husband's wish. Enough to believe the cycle might break with Ethan. The garden grew darker, the first stars pressing against the sky. I sat there, alone, but not lonely, my hands folded in my lap. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope. The screen would close here, not with triumph, not with spectacle, but with truth. that justice had been served, that consequences had been paid, that even in ruin the seed of change could grow, and that a grandmother, scarred but unbroken, had kept her promise to her husband, to herself, and to the family name,